how digital assets can affect the traditional financial system. With Jarek Bialek, Revenue Capital LLC.
As the name says, my name is Jarek. I'm the CEO of Revenue Capital. Just a few words about Revenue Capital. Within Revenue Capital, we assist businesses with funding, with Web3 fundraising tools and solutions. Today, however, I'm not going to talk about fundraising. I'm going to talk about a topic which is strictly related with tokenization, asset tokenization. But okay, from the beginning. Since the crowd is small, let's do it a little bit interactive. So, who recognizes the slides? From which movie does it come from? What do you think? Back to the Future, exactly. It's, to be precise, it's part 2, right? 1989. Why the heck I'm showing this to you? I mean, the reason is that we are having a tendency, and it hasn't changed really since 1980s, to visualize the future based on the current needs or the current problems, right? So yes, as it says, it's 1989. The world in 2015 seen as from the 1980s perspective. Now the question is, what if we try to imagine the future of the current financial system based on the current problems and the current needs we have? Now, the difference between this and the Back to the Future movies is that there are not too many movies, at least I'm not aware of too many movies depicting that, right? I don't know, maybe the topic is boring, and that's the reason. So, looking at the current problems, hyperinflation, that's probably something what is the mostly discussed currently. So the slide is showing like the purchasing power, rather the decrease in the purchasing power over the decades. And I'm not sure how closely you can look, but if you look at the second part of the chart, it's probably no surprise that Bretton Woods conference starts the rapid decline when it comes to the purchasing value of money. This is a very complicated chart, but just let's focus on the bottom part of it. So if you look at the bars, those bars, they represent the volatility of the stock markets. Now, it started really sharp, like, 1920s, 1930s, right? But basically, this volatility continues the same way as the economic cycles. They keep just bouncing those loops. So volatility stays with us and is going to stay for good. And it's the factor which most likely will accelerate in the coming years. Now, this chart shows only data until 2020, but we can only imagine what is happening now. So all this makes it extremely difficult to invest especially from the small investor's perspective. And now, I don't have this chart shown here, unfortunately, but there's a very, very famous chart which shows the relation to GDP. If I'm not wrong, it was a GDP in US, but let's imagine it's, GDP shown as for all developed economies. Relation of this GDP to the net salaries earned in those economies. So there's a widening gap. There's a huge gap, also starting in 1960s, 1970s. And what it means, it basically means that, whoever is earning money based on the classic employer-employee contract struggles when it comes to maintaining its middle-class position or when it comes to his or her aspirations to enter the space, where in reality it means that without being active as an investor or thinking out of the box, outside of this equation, doesn't really guarantee, maintaining the situation or meeting your aspirations. So here I'm slowly building up, to go to the meritum, to build up the momentum of my presentation, because what I really want to do, I want to present one version of the future, which might call to fulfill these needs or to address those needs. Okay, so I don't have much time, meaning that I'd like to introduce you to the system, which is already a little bit dusty, already a little bit outdated. Actually, it's outdated probably since several centuries ago. The old good barter. So what we know about barter as we stand, the classic barter is having several flaws, probably the major flaw being that you need a face-to-face matchmaking made prior to the transaction happening. So it's very, very limited in terms of scalability, which means that, you know, the more nodes you add over there, so the more people, the more goods, the more supply and the more demand, it's more and more and more difficult, like, to keep transacting in the pace we currently know it. So no surprise, that's the major reason why the money has been introduced, like at the beginning of the antiquity. And with money, obviously, we're gaining scalability. So why money is so successful? It gets a scalability. It also doesn't require market making. The money, the metallic representation of money, gold, eventually got transformed into banknotes. The banknote got transformed into digital currency. The digital currency stands for something what we currently know as the modern credit system. So this is what is powering the current economy. This is what stands for the current financial system. Now, because it's so widely spread and because it works, it doesn't mean that it's the most natural and flawless system of transactioning, especially when it comes to transactioning value. So over the last years, observing the development of the Web3 with all its solutions and products, like something what is mostly making me excited are the tokenized or are the asset-backed tokens. Asset-backed tokens, which we can call practically stable coins, as they derive their value from the real value represented by the underlying asset. So the largest benefit of having asset-backed tokens, in my perspective, is the fragmentation of the value, meaning that something what previously has maintained being undividable now becomes digitally broken into the current representation, into the representation of the value of those assets. So what does it mean in our context, in the context of the barter? It means that suddenly the old system, the old barter system, which required rapid matchmaking, which obviously faced obvious technological constraints, now the system can be revitalized with the invention of asset-backed tokens. So let's just use this scenario where we have, imagine that we have a soybean crop producer, a soybean crop farmer, who wants to buy cattle. He goes to the cattle farmer. The cattle farmer obviously is not interested in soybeans. He's interested in diesel. Now, diesel refineries doesn't necessarily need cattle, which means that this process gets more and more and more complex. The more geographically distant we are and the more goods and people we introduce to the system, as mentioned before. Now, imagine that, all those matchmaking pairs are recorded on blockchain. And imagine that the system makes those connections instantly, meaning that the largest constraint of barter becomes removed with the system. Add to this the idea of the asset-based tokens, so the tokenization of the value, and we get the system which allows us to, first of all, derive value and transact the value outside of the currently known monetary system. It's obviously not flawless, right? So I'm not claiming that, this is something what we're going to start seeing tomorrow. So my idea for this presentation is to kind of inspire you a little bit, to think what if and what possible options we have outside of the current financial system as we know it. But I strongly believe that with tokenized barter, as we can call it, we might see the solution or the solutions for the several or certain communities, for the certain assets or the certain services to be exchanged and to be traded in a different way. So that was my very short, very rapid presentation. I understand we are short on time. Not sure if you have time for questions. Maybe one. If there's anyone interested, okay, maybe. Right, okay, so once again, my name is Jarek. I'll be here around. I'll be running a panel, if I understand it right, in a moment. So you'll see me more from the stage for now. Thank you very much, guys. Cheers.